Well, what's up, music lovers? Thanks for clicking on my channel, and you saw the title, you saw the thumbnail. I'm just going to be ranking every single Soundgarden album from Ultra Mega OK up through King Animal. I'm not going to do their EPs or their demo. But yeah, Soundgarden's one of my favorite bands. They are absolutely incredible. And they're pretty consistent with their albums. I do think that there's maybe like one that kind of stands out as not being as good as the others, and one that stands above the rest as just being absolutely incredible. But just a pretty consistent catalog overall. And before we go ahead, if you like hard rock, heavy metal, Soundgarden, all these sorts of bands, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. I know it's a cliche to ask, but it really does help the channel grow. And yeah, let's just get straight into it. So coming in first, their debut album from 1988, Ultra Mega OK. And I think the title of this album is pretty good because it's okay. I'm going to put it right in B tier. So I absolutely love Beyond the Wheel. I think it's one of Soundgarden's best songs. It's so cool to hear Chris singing in more of like a power metal type style. And there's a lot of really cool ideas on this album. Had I heard it when it came out in 1987, 1988, whenever it came out, I would have been blown away, and I definitely would have told myself, hey, this is a band that I need to keep my eye on because they're going to be going places. A lot of like the unique sort of quirks of Soundgarden are here on this album, and other songs like Flower and All Your Lives are really cool. The reason I'm just putting it in B is because I feel like it's sort of vanilla Soundgarden. It's not as interesting as they would go on to be. They had a lot more to offer than just this first album. I also think that the songwriting and the production are a little rough. The production, I can get over that, but even by my standards, I think that it's not really capturing what the band's about. Even by the standards of the time, like late 80s, where a lot of bands didn't have the best production. This is still kind of like, yeah, just a little off. And I also think that a lot of the songwriting might be a bit off at times too. Not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that there's still a lot of punk influence on this album. And for myself personally, I've never been that big of a fan of punk music. I don't hate it, but there's just... I've always preferred the metal way of writing songs, and that's definitely on this album. There's some really heavy riffs, but overall it's just, they haven't kind of formed the sound that they're gonna form. It's a great start, and like I said, it's very unique, and had I heard this when it first came out, if I had been alive, I would have, pricked up my ears and be like, wow, I gotta keep an eye on this band. But being that I know kind of the Soundgarden sound, and I had to go back to this first album to hear it, I like where they would go rather than where they started. I think being right in the middle is a good place for Ultra Mega OK. And coming up next is Louder Than Love, which I believe came out in 1989. Maybe it came out in 1990, but I think it was 89. And it feels like it should go right along with Ultra Mega OK because it sounds very similar. And it's still, not just in the songwriting, but also production. I like it a little bit less than Ultra Mega OK, so I'm going to put it down in C tier. Now, before I kind of go into detail about why I don't really like this album that much, I just want to say that I Awake is an absolute banger of a song. I think Chris is going ham on the vocals, and more so than that, just the odd time signature, the extreme progginess of that song is really cool. Sadly, I don't really like the rest of the album overall. It still has production that I think just doesn't do Soundgarden justice. Kind of like the first one, but for some reason I feel like on the first album it sounds better. There's something with the drums on Louder Than Love where they sound way too boomy, but not in a good way. And it's not just the production. I feel like the songwriting has a lot of rough spots. There's a lot of sections of songs that I really love on the album, like, the riff to Hands All Over You, and there's a lot of cool ideas, but for whatever reason, this album just doesn't land with me the way I feel like it should. Not just the way it should, but I guess the way I feel like I wish it did. I do enjoy how the song Big Dumb Sex is basically them just making fun of hair metal. But even with that, I feel that's a good example where Chris Cornell's lyrics are not what we would come to know them as. He's still developing. A lot of his lyrics on these first two albums feel kind of safe. They feel sort of like lacking that really emotional sort of and socially aware kind of lyricist he would go on to be, which is what I love about Chris Cornell's lyrics. A lot of them, they are, really, really heartfelt and have like a subtle message in them a lot of the times. And he's kind of like starting to go with that a little bit on this album, but not nearly as much as he would on the next album. And he did eventually get there with the next album, and that is Bad Motor Finger. And yeah, I'm just putting that right up in A tier. There's only one album I'm going to be putting up in S tier, so this is high praise. Bad Motor Finger is absolutely fucking incredible. The production on this album is incredible as well. I feel like this is the first album where Soundgarden really sounded like Soundgarden. You just hear those first notes on Rusty Cage and you're like, oh, this is an entirely different band than the band that was playing on those first two albums. Slaves and Bulldozers might be Chris Cornell's best vocal performance. I mean, there's a bunch of songs that you could give that title to, but I think that's definitely in the running. And this album just has riffs for days. I mean, Holy Water, New Damage, Room 1,000 Years Wide. The drums and bass on songs, especially on songs like Jesus Christ Pose in particular, and the end of Rusty Cage are absolutely insane. Outshined also has some really heavy riffs, and that's a great example too of where Chris's lyrics are getting a bit more emotional, a bit more personal, kind of like what we would know them to be. Bad Motor Finger, everything about it, the band sounds so much more mature, the production's better, the songwriting's better, the riffs are so heavy. I just love this album. I mean, I know I probably mentioned it before, but I also just want to say the riff to Holy Water, it's so good. The band's experimenting more with odd time signatures, which they always were, but also more, non-standard tunings, and they just brought everything together into an incredible album here. You might ask, like, how could they get better from there? Well, I'm glad you asked that rhetorical question that I just said that you asked, that you probably didn't ask, but yeah, Soundgarden would go on to get better, in my opinion, and that is when we get to Super Unknown, which is just going to go straight up in S tier. Yeah, this album is just beyond incredible. Everything that worked with Bad Motor Finger, they took and they expanded on, and it just sounds better than ever. Lyrically, you have songs like Let Me Drown, Fell on Black Days, The Day I Tried to Live, Mailman, and I especially love the lyrics to Limo Wreck. They're just a great cautionary tale about luxury and excess consumerism. It's like, oh, dude, it doesn't matter. You can go spend all your money on a limo, but one wrong turn and it's all kind of wrecked, isn't it? So I love that. And then songs like Head Down and Black Hole Sun mix like a psychedelic sort of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with the early metal of like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. They just do a really cool job of mixing those two styles, and it also hints at where the band would go in the future. Speaking of that, I think that the title track, Super Unknown, is just, it answers the question of what would happen if Led Zeppelin came out in the 90s instead of the 70s, and it just sounds so good. The album has some super proggy elements to it also, like songs like Half are just really cool that they did it, like, hey, let's have a minute and a half long instrumental song. Well, I guess it's not instrumental, but you can barely understand what the lyrics are saying, but just have this really cool Indian influenced out there sort of song that it's never going to get played on the radio, but we're still going to put it on the album because it sounds good. I'm really glad that made the cut because Half is a really badass song. Just everything about this album is incredible. All four band members, the producer, all the additional musicians, they came together and they made something that is just absolutely incredible and has stood the test of time. I love it. I can't really put it into words how much I love this album. And I don't really care if putting Super Unknown up as the best album so far, at least, is sort of like a standard opinion to have. I mean, it's a standard opinion for a reason. I love this album. It is incredible. And it just, they really knocked it out of the park with that album. So after an album like Super Unknown, it must be really, really difficult to follow up, and we have Down on the Upside, which this is going to be my hot take opinion. I think this album is incredible too. Maybe not as good as Super Unknown and Bad Motor Finger, but I'm still putting it up right in A. It is a bit of an underrated album, so there, I was gushing about Super Unknown. I was just kind of going with the standard opinion. Well, here's my hot take opinion. Down on the Upside, pretty great. Without a doubt, it's not as heavy as the last two albums were. They kind of took what they were doing with songs like Black Hole Sun and Head Down and kind of made that the majority of the album. But for people who don't think this album is heavy, there's a lot of really heavy Soundgarden songs on this. Ty Cobb, Never the Machine Forever. Tighter and Tighter has a really cool, heavy, down-tuned riff. Songs like Rhinosaur, they're all pretty heavy, especially Ty Cobb and Never the Machine Forever. I remember the first time I heard Never the Machine Forever. You have that short bass intro, and then it just slams you in the face with that riff, and with Chris just screaming his head off. Ty Cobb is also really heavy, super fast. They were probably being influenced by punk, but it is almost kind of bordering on like what you might hear a thrash metal band too, and just a lot of aggression, especially with like the last Chris Cornell scream. Really fast also. So, if you like some of the heaviness that were on these two albums, not first two albums, but the last two albums they had done, you'd probably really like those songs too if you've just written off that album. And then you have songs like Blow Up the Outside World and Burden in My Hand, which were really expanding on what they were doing with Head Down and Black Hole Sun. This isn't really a commentary on the album as a whole, but I really love the song Apple Bite. It's just cool that they were experimenting and doing weird stuff that they hadn't done before. And I think the songwriting on that album is overall pretty tight. And I can understand why at the time people saw it as a step down after Super Unknown and Bad Motor Finger, because it might have been a bit jarring to go from albums that are that heavy to an album that has about half the songs not being that heavy. But I think it's a natural progression. You can really see from Bad Motor Finger to Super Unknown, they get a little bit more experimental, and then they take that experimental creativity they were having and put it into Down on the Upside. So maybe shocking at the time, but I think it's a pretty natural progression. And there's my Soundgarden hot take. Down on the Upside, pretty great album. Okay, and so the last album that I'll be talking about is the last Soundgarden album we ever got, unfortunately, and that is King Animal. And no, I'm just fucking with you. Yeah, I'm going to put it up in A tier. This album was a great way to end their career. I think it does a really good job of mixing together the parts of Super Unknown, Bad Motor Finger, and Down on the Upside that all worked. It's overall a bit heavier than Down on the Upside, but it still has more of the acoustic or experimental songs that they were doing on Down on the Upside, just blending it better with those other two albums that are, all kind of considered their classic albums. Songs like Non-State Actor by Crooked Steps, Blood on the Valley Floor especially has a really cool riff. Eyelids, Mouth, and Rowing are all really great. Tari is another amazing song. I think, though, the reason I have it a bit lower than Bad Motor Finger and Down the Upside, it might be just because I haven't listened to it as much, but I might not have listened to it as much because there are a couple songs that I feel like are a little filler that just don't land. Nothing too terrible, but, when I have to compare it to those three albums right here, which are all just incredible in my opinion, I think Bones of Birds or Black Saturday are not terrible, but just not exactly my favorite Soundgarden songs. So when push comes to shove, I have to put it down a little bit lower. But yeah, what a legacy. There you have it. That is the definitive ranking of all the Soundgarden albums, according to me. And it's not definitive. We all have different opinions, and it's cool. What are your favorite Soundgarden albums? Let me know below. And what a legacy. Soundgarden, they weren't around or as active for as long as a lot of other bands are, but they made up for that by just having banger album after banger album. And Chris Cornell, we miss you. Rest in peace. So yeah, I probably have another video popping up right about now if you want to go check that out. And if you like this video and you like hard rock, heavy metal, progressive rock, just all sorts of guitar-driven music, please like, comment, subscribe to the channel. You know, trying to build a little community of music lovers here. Hopefully we'll get up to 500 subscribers soon. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and take care. Hope to see you at the next video. Peace.